It is 2:47 in the morning on Saturday, March 1st, 2026. In a small town in Zanesville, Ohio, a sheet metal worker named Dave wakes to use the bathroom. He picks up his phone. His news app has lit up with a banner he reads twice before he believes it. U.S. and Israel launch massive strikes on Iran. Supreme Leader Khamenei reported dead. He doesn't go back to sleep. In Austin, Texas, a 29-year-old software engineer named Priya is still awake, debugging a backend deployment. She opens X. The entire platform is on fire, not the usual fire. The kind where every verified account, every anonymous account, every meme page and geopolitical analyst has posted the exact same thing at the same time. This is real. Neither Dave nor Priya voted the same way in 2024. They don't agree on much. But tonight, they are sharing the same dread. The specific, cold dread of a country that just learned it is at war, not from a presidential address, not from a congressional vote, not from a press conference, but from a social media post. That post, an edited, narrated video, uploaded to Truth Social and X at 2:31 a.m., is the full extent of the American public's formal notification that its military had, hours earlier, launched what officials are now calling Operation Epic Fury, a joint U.S. Israeli campaign targeting Iran's nuclear infrastructure, military leadership, and fatally, the man who had ruled the Islamic Republic for 35 years. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, dead, confirmed. No declaration of war, no congressional vote, no 48-hour notification to the Speaker of the House, as required by a law passed over 50 years ago. Here is the central question driving everything that follows, the question that matters to Dave in Zanesville, to Priya in Austin, to every American filling their gas tank this week as prices tick upward. Who in America has the authority to start a war? And what happens when a president decides that person is him and him alone? This is the story of how we got here, what the numbers actually tell us, and what comes next if Congress cannot or will not pull this back. To understand how an American president came to order the killing of a foreign head of state without a vote of Congress, you have to go back, not to last week, not to last year, but to a decision made in May of 2018. That year, the first Trump administration withdrew the United States from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, commonly called the Iran nuclear deal. Under that 2015 agreement, Iran had agreed to reduce its uranium enrichment to no more than 3.67% purity, nowhere near the 90% required for a weapon. In exchange, crippling international sanctions were lifted. When the United States pulled out, those restrictions collapsed. Iran, watching the deal evaporate, made its own calculation. It stopped playing by the rules. By February 2023, IAEA inspectors reported detecting uranium particles enriched to 83.7% purity inside Iran's Fordo facility, a figure just 6 percentage points below weapons grade. Iran called it an unintended fluctuation. Few arms control experts believed that. By the end of 2024, the intelligence picture had grown urgent. The IAEA estimated Iran could produce enough highly enriched material for 5 to 6 nuclear weapons in under 2 weeks. The breakout clock, once measured in years, had, for all practical purposes, hit zero. Meanwhile, the Trump administration, returning to power in January 2025, relaunched what it called a maximum pressure plus campaign. Sanctions were reimposed. Envoy Steve Witkoff opened back-channel negotiations through Oman. 5 rounds of talks took place between April and June 2025, but Iran refused to surrender its right to enrich uranium on its own soil. That was its red line. Washington had won too, no enrichment above 3.67%. The talks collapsed. In October 2025, a report from the Institute for International Political Studies in Milan cited sources inside Tehran. Supreme Leader Khamenei had quietly authorized the development of miniaturized nuclear warheads for ballistic missiles. And in a confidential report dated the same month, the IAEA noted that it could no longer assure the world that Iran's nuclear program was exclusively peaceful. IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi told an Austrian newspaper in December 2025 that inspectors remained in Iran but could not access damaged facilities at Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordo, facilities whose status was now functionally unknown. This is the intelligence picture that the Trump administration was sitting on as February 2026 began. Here is what the law says, not what politicians claim it says, what it actually says. Article I, Section 8 of the United States Constitution grants Congress, and Congress alone, the authority to declare war, raise armed forces, and regulate their use. Article II makes the President commander-in-chief of those forces. The founders split this power deliberately. They had lived under kings. They knew what happened when one man controlled both the sword and the decision to unsheath it. In 1973, after the Vietnam War, a conflict that killed over 58,000 Americans and was prosecuted for years without a formal declaration of war, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution over President Nixon's veto. The law requires the President to notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying forces into hostilities. It then mandates that without congressional authorization, those forces must be withdrawn within 60 days, plus 30 days for safe evacuation. Since 1973, presidents of both parties have submitted over 132 reports to Congress under the War Powers Resolution. They have also repeatedly argued that the resolution is unconstitutional, or at minimum, that it doesn't apply to whatever specific action they're currently taking. Reagan did it in Lebanon. Clinton did it in Kosovo. Obama did it in Libya. The pattern is consistent. Presidents act, lawyers argue, Congress debates, and the forces stay deployed. But what happened on February 28, 2026 is categorically different in two respects. First, the scale. Over 1,200 munitions dropped across 24 of Iran's 31 provinces. Iranian IRGC retaliatory strikes launched against 27 U.S. military bases across the Middle East. 4 American service members killed, embassies targeted. This is not a limited strike. This is a war. Second, the notification, a social media video at 2:31 a.m., not the Speaker of the House, not the President pro tempore of the Senate. A video posted online after the bombs were already falling. The Arms Control Association published a statement within hours of the strikes. This was an illegal war of choice. It was not authorized or even debated by Congress as required by Article I, Section 8 of the Constitution and the 1973 War Powers Act. And so today, Tuesday, March 3, 2026, Day 3 of active combat, the United States Senate and House of Representatives are voting on a War Powers resolution to halt the operation and require congressional authorization for its continuation. The sponsors: Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, Representative Ro Khanna of California, and Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky. A rare bipartisan coalition that stretches from the progressive left to the libertarian right, united not necessarily by opposition to the war's objectives, but by a shared alarm at the process by which it began. Let's deal in numbers, because numbers don't spin. Regarding the military footprint, Israel's Air Force dropped more than 1,200 munitions across 24 of Iran's 31 provinces in the opening 24 hours. Iran's IRGC launched retaliatory attacks against 27 U.S. bases in the Middle East and Israeli military facilities. 4 Americans have been confirmed killed. Kuwait alone intercepted 178 ballistic missiles and 384 drones in a single defensive window. The U.S. Embassy in Riyadh was struck. Regarding the energy market, approximately 20 million barrels of oil transit the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That represents roughly $500 billion in annual global energy trade, a fifth of the world's entire seaborne oil supply, passing through a waterway Iran can and has threatened to block. Brent crude surged 6.7% in a single session, its largest single-day gain since June 2025. Bank of America's commodity strategist Francisco Blanche has warned that Brent could breach $100 per barrel if Iran targets neighboring energy infrastructure. Regarding the consumer impact, GasBuddy analyst Patrick DeHaan projects U.S. gasoline prices will rise 10 to 30 cents per gallon within days, with localized spikes as high as 85 cents. This lands on top of a tariff-driven retail price increase of nearly 5 percentage points already baked into the economy by the Yale Budget Lab's own analysis. Regarding safe havens, gold, the instrument investors reach for when they lose faith in everything else, climbed above $5,200 per troy ounce, up 3.4% in a single session. J.P. Morgan analysts now project gold reaching $6,300 by year-end. Bitcoin, by contrast, dropped more than 4%, hovering around $64,600, down nearly 50% from its record high of $126,000. The message from markets: this is not a risk-on moment. Regarding the nuclear baseline, at the time of the strikes, Iran's uranium stockpile, enriched to varying levels, was more than 40 times the amount permitted under the now-defunct JCPOA. IAEA inspectors had been unable to access key facilities since late 2025. The U.S. intelligence community had assessed that Iran's nuclear activities better position it to produce a nuclear device, if it chooses to do so. That is not a declaration that Iran was building a bomb. It is an assessment that the window to stop it from doing so diplomatically had likely closed. Here is where it gets complicated, because alongside verified data, a parallel information ecosystem is operating at full speed on X, TikTok, and Substack. Theory 1: the war was the distraction. On Reddit and across several prominent Substack newsletters, a widely circulated theory argues that Operation Epic Fury was timed, deliberately, to pull attention from the Supreme Court's February 20th ruling striking down Trump's tariff regime. The argument goes, when the tariff legal architecture collapsed, the administration needed a new news cycle, a rally around the flag moment to reset the domestic political clock. The official counter-argument is straightforward. The CIA had been tracking Khamenei's location for months, and Envoy Witkoff's own public account confirms that nuclear negotiations collapsed before the operation launched. There is a documented causal chain that doesn't require conspiracy. However, the fact that the operation was announced at 2:31 a.m. on a Saturday, within 72 hours of the Supreme Court tariff ruling, continues to fuel this theory. It is not verified. It is also not irrational to ask the question. Theory 2: Israel made the call. A second viral theory, circulating heavily in Arabic-language social media and picked up by several progressive American commentators, claims that the operational decision, specifically the targeting of Khamenei, originated with Israeli intelligence and was approved rather than initiated by Washington. The implication: the United States was drawn into a war designed primarily to serve Israeli strategic interests in eliminating Iran's nuclear capability and its regional proxy network. The administration has not provided a detailed account of the decision architecture. Netanyahu's public statement that the operation would usher in an era of peace has been clipped and shared millions of times as evidence of this framing. This theory remains unverified. What is verified is that the U.S. and Israel conducted the operation jointly and that the 48-hour congressional notification required by law did not happen. Theory 3: the 60-day clock is the strategy. This is arguably the most legally sophisticated theory circulating in policy circles. The argument: the administration intentionally bypassed congressional authorization, knowing it has a 60-day window under the War Powers Resolution before Congress can force a withdrawal, and that 60 days is more than enough time to achieve its operational objectives, present Congress with a fait accompli, and dare anyone to cut off funding for a war that has already been fought. Bloomberg Opinion's legal team published a piece Tuesday morning titled, "Congress Let Presidents Ignore the War Powers Act for Decades. They're Reaping What They Sowed." That framing, that this is a systemic failure, not a partisan one, is the most important lens through which to understand today's vote. Consider the administration's argument: Iran was months, possibly weeks, from crossing the nuclear threshold. The IAEA couldn't access the facilities. Diplomatic channels had exhausted themselves across 5 rounds of talks. What were we supposed to do? Wait for a mushroom cloud over Tel Aviv and call that a failure of intelligence? The president acted on the best available intelligence to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran from destabilizing not just the Middle East, but global energy markets, global security architecture, and a fragile post-COVID global economy. The War Powers Resolution was designed for a different era. The 48-hour notice requirement was written before the internet, before real-time intelligence, before the kind of operational precision that makes a surgical strike possible. Sometimes the commander-in-chief has to command. Now consider the constitutional skeptic. That is precisely the argument every president in every unauthorized war has made. Truman said it in Korea. Johnson said it in Vietnam. Bush said it in Iraq. They were all wrong, and the American people paid for it in blood and treasure for years afterward. The Constitution is not a suggestion. It does not have a "but what if it's really urgent" exception. Article I says Congress declares war, full stop. And here's the practical dimension that Washington keeps ignoring. Dave in Zanesville is going to pay 30 cents more per gallon this week. His heating bill is going up. The tariff-driven price increases haven't landed yet. And now we've just lit the Middle East on fire. Who asked Dave? Who asked Priya? The whole point of requiring a congressional vote is that 535 elected representatives, people who have to face their constituents, have to look those constituents in the eye and say, yes, this is worth it. That accountability doesn't exist in a 2 a.m. social media post. There is something genuinely new about the way this conflict has entered American consciousness, and it would be dishonest to pretend it isn't happening. Operation Epic Fury was announced via an edited video with a soundtrack. On TikTok, the first response wasn't horror or celebration, it was a wave of remixes. The title Epic Fury became an instant meme template applied to everything from food delivery delays to congressional gridlock. The phrase Trump used in a CNN interview, "The big wave hasn't even happened. The big one is coming soon," has spawned hundreds of surfer videos, disaster footage overlays, and economic anxiety edits. At time of writing, the most shared version has 47 million views. This is what political scientists call the memification of consequence, when events of historic gravity get processed through irony and remix before the gravity itself can land. It is neither new nor uniquely American, but the speed at which it happens now and the way it substitutes engagement for understanding creates a specific civic danger. The national conversation moves from what just happened and is it legal to which meme template fits this in under 6 hours. On X, the dominant hashtags are Operation Epic Fury, Unauthorized War, and War Powers Resolution. The last one, a legal procedure that was obscure trivia 72 hours ago, has now been searched on Google more than 12 million times in the United States alone. That is, in its own strange way, a form of civic education. The internet forcing people to learn the constitutional architecture of a democracy because a war started while they were asleep. Sentiment data is still crystallizing. Polling on an event 3 days old is inherently preliminary. But the early numbers from Ipsos and Morning Consult tracking surveys paint a picture that should unsettle political strategists on both sides. Approximately 54% of Americans say they were not adequately informed before the strikes. They learned about the operation from social media rather than any official government communication. That number is higher among adults under 35 and independent voters. Asked whether they support the strikes in principle, that is, setting aside the process, the country splits almost exactly in half. 48% support, 44% oppose, 8% uncertain. That is not the rally around the flag number the White House might have expected. Previous presidential military actions, the 1991 Gulf War, the post-9/11 Afghanistan campaign, saw initial approval ratings above 70%. What may explain the gap is what might be called the trust deficit. Americans who lived through Iraq, who watched the weapons of mass destruction intelligence failure, who saw mission accomplished become a cultural punchline, carry a baseline skepticism toward executive claims of military necessity. The 2 a.m. social media notification didn't just violate a law. For millions of Americans, it confirmed a suspicion that their consent is an afterthought. Let us be direct about the political dimension, because pretending it doesn't exist would be its own form of dishonesty. The 2026 midterm elections are 8 months away. Every House seat is up. 34 Senate seats are contested. The economy, battered by tariffs, interest rate uncertainty, and now an oil price shock, was already the central issue. Operation Epic Fury has, in a single weekend, scrambled every campaign calculation on both sides. For Republicans in swing districts, the calculation is excruciating. Rally behind a wartime president and risk the backlash if the operation drags, costs lives, or triggers a broader regional war, or break with the White House and face accusations of weakness at a moment of national security crisis. For Democrats, today's war powers vote is a double-edged instrument. It is constitutionally correct. It is also politically risky. Opposing a war that polls at 48% support risks looking like obstruction if the nuclear threat was as real as the administration claims. The only senators and representatives who currently appear to have clear political wind at their backs are the Kaine-Paul Massey coalition, the bipartisan sponsors of the War Powers Resolution. Their argument is procedural rather than substantive. They are not saying this war was wrong. They are saying this war was unauthorized. That distinction is, surprisingly, resonating with voters who might otherwise disagree on foreign policy. The War Powers Resolution vote today will almost certainly pass the Senate, where the Kaine-Paul coalition has secured enough bipartisan support. Its fate in the House is less certain. Republican leadership has indicated it will work to slow-walk the measure to the floor. If it reaches the president's desk, a veto is likely. Overriding that veto requires a two-thirds majority in both chambers. That math is, currently, not there. Which means the most probable short-term outcome is this: the operation continues. The 60-day clock ticks, Congress debates, and in 60 days, the administration either requests authorization, which forces every member of Congress to take a public vote on a war already in progress, or it claims the military objectives have been achieved and begins a drawdown. But the variables that sit outside that legal clock are the ones that actually determine what November looks like. In the best-case scenario, the operation achieves its stated objectives within the 60-day window. Iran's nuclear infrastructure is damaged severely enough to set back its weapons timeline by 5 to 10 years. Iran's internal political structure, decapitated of Khamenei's leadership, fractures. A successor government, more technocratic, less ideologically committed to confrontation, begins quiet back-channel communication with Washington. Oil prices stabilize below $90 per barrel. The Strait of Hormuz remains open. In this scenario, Trump claims a historic foreign policy victory. The legal controversy over congressional authorization fades in the glow of an outcome that by conventional metrics succeeded. The midterms become a referendum on economic management rather than the war itself. Republican incumbents hold their margins. The War Powers Resolution becomes a footnote rather than a constitutional crisis. In the worst-case scenario, Iran does not fracture. It consolidates. A successor to Khamenei, possibly more radical, with less institutional restraint, decides that the only deterrent against further American and Israeli strikes is the very thing this operation was designed to prevent: a nuclear weapon, assembled quickly from the existing stockpile of highly enriched uranium, at a covert facility the IAEA has never inspected. Russia and China provide cover at the UN Security Council. Iran-backed proxies in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen escalate against U.S. forces across the region. Oil breaches $100, then $120. Gasoline at the pump in Zanesville, Ohio hits $6. The tariff-driven inflation that was already running at nearly 5 percentage points of retail price increase compounds with an energy shock. The Federal Reserve faces impossible choices between fighting inflation and supporting a slowing economy. The word stagflation enters daily conversation. And then comes November: 34 Senate seats, every House race, an electorate that is angrier, more economically distressed, and less trusting of institutions than at any point in recent memory. In that scenario, the question is no longer whether Congress should have voted before the war started. The question becomes, who do we hold accountable for the fact that it didn't? Dave in Zanesville is going to answer that question at the ballot box. So is Priya in Austin. The Constitution was designed so that their representatives would answer it first, before the bombs dropped, not after. That did not happen, and that, more than any single military objective, more than any oil price, more than any meme, is the story.